Evening. This is Tuesday, June 10th, 147 days until the 2008 presidential election. For 4 hours and 40 minutes last night, one United States congressman held forth on the floor of the House of Representatives. No bluster, no filibuster, and no filler. 290 minutes of largely uninterrupted substance outlining a litany of alleged high crimes and misdemeanors committed by President Bush and his administration. Our fifth story on the countdown, the impeachment of George W. Bush. Not that it will ever actually happen, but that it likely will not be due to the quality of the case presented by Democratic Congressman Dennis Kucinich, the Cleveland representative and erstwhile presidential candidate, introducing 35 articles against President Bush on the heels of the Senate Intelligence Committee's report on the administration's misuse of pre-war intelligence, and in the wake of former White House Press Secretary Scott McClellan's published contentions that the president manipulated public opinion through a political propaganda campaign to justify the invasion of Iraq. Mr. Kucinich reading out every word of his 35-count impeachment resolution. Some categories of transgressions: torture, surveillance, obstruction, sheer incompetence, and Iraq, especially Iraq. Mr. Kucinich making clear that the president has violated his oath of office and his constitutional duty that the laws be faithfully executed.
In his conduct while President of the United States, George W. Bush, in violation of his constitutional oath to faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and to the best of his ability preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, and in violation of his constitutional duty under Article 2, Section 3 of the Constitution to take care that the laws be faithfully executed, has both personally and acting through his agents and subordinates, together with the Vice President, illegally spent public dollars on a secret propaganda campaign to manufacture a false cause for war against Iraq.
Kucinich having introduced similar legislation against Vice President Cheney last year. That resolution was referred to the House Judiciary Committee, which has taken no action on the measure. Speaker Nancy Pelosi having consistently stated that there will be no consideration, none, of impeachment proceedings against Mr. Bush, declaring the matter off the table. Tonight, Mr. Kucinich to seek having that measure acted upon. The word is that he has agreed to a full House vote on whether to refer the resolution to the Judiciary Committee, in other words, to send it to the same purgatory the other measure did, but not before the bill is read in its entirety again. Time now to call in George Washington University law professor and constitutional law expert, Jonathan Turley. Good evening, John.
Hi, Keith.
I've often argued here that even if you think the words aren't going to lead to any action, say the words anyway, simply to get them on the record for history and simply because nothing has ever changed from bad to good in this country without somebody first saying, this is bad. Assess the importance of what Dennis Kucinich did last night.
You know, it is very important. The fact is that this is not supposed to happen the way it's happened in the last 7 years. The framers, I think, would have been astonished by the absolute passivity, if not the collusion, of the Democrats in protecting President Bush from impeachment. I mean, they created a system that was essentially idiot-proof, and God knows we put that through a test in the past years. But I don't think they ever anticipated that so many members of the opposition would stand quietly in the face of clear presidential crimes. And it has many of us who study the Constitution quite worried that we have a real crisis here. This is not something that really was supposed to happen. It was not something that one would predict.
This is the list that he presented last night, a remarkably lengthy and thorough record of high crimes and misdemeanors. It's a cascade, really. Did Kucinich successfully make his case?
I think he made a case. I mean, frankly, some of these claims are not really impeachable offenses. I mean, for example, it's not impeachable to be negligent. If that was the case, we'd lose half the people that sat in the Oval Office. But there are plenty of crimes there. This is a target-rich environment. What's really disturbing for many of us is that it takes a real effort for Democrats to walk from the floor to their offices and not trip over crimes. I mean, they are all over the record, from destruction of evidence to illegal surveillance to unlawful torture programs. They're all over the place. And what's amazing is that the president is hiding in plain view. He hasn't really denied the elements of these offenses. So all that is lacking is political will. Now, that doesn't mean that suddenly the Democrats are going to get principled and say, my God, we took an oath and we need to fulfill it regardless of the outcome. But it does mean that at least one member, and actually actually more than one, are really calling their colleagues to the floor and saying it's time to pony up. It's time to answer the public of whether you stand for the Constitution and against its abridgment.
Have we ever seen a situation like this before, John? Obviously, 1868 and Andrew Johnson, there were constitutional issues, but that was a political box that he was squeezed into. Various laws came by that said he couldn't dismiss anybody who worked basically for the government. Right. He violated those laws. They impeached him. He was kind of set up, even though he probably was not a very good president. Clearly, the Clinton impeachment, whatever legalities were involved in that, that was to some degree a setup, too. This is different in that it's a political issue again, but it's not the politics of impeaching somebody. It's the politics of not impeaching somebody who seems to clearly constitutionally deserve it.
Yeah, that is the most remarkable, if not bizarre, aspect of all this, that President Bush's allies in the last 7 years have been the Democratic leadership and the Democratic members that have repeatedly stepped in to protect him, not just from impeachment, but serious investigation. And it's part of a very cynical political strategy. It has succeeded. The Democrats know that they can retain the Congress if they just let this guy, you know, sort of ripen on the vine, and that they're afraid that there could be a backlash if they try to impeach. But of course, that's literally all politics and no principle. They took an oath in the House of Representatives. And the most important thing that they have to do as House members is to stand firm in the face of presidential crimes. And I think history will be very, very severe, not just for Speaker Pelosi, but all of the Democrats, of how they could let this come to pass, where they stood silent and did nothing in the face of such compelling criminal record.
Well, clearly they are going to let it come to pass in this way. So that begs the question, is there anything to do after January 20th of next year? Is there any mechanism or precedent for dealing with a presidency that has already ended?
Well, there's a lot that can be done. I mean, first of all, the new administration can certainly reverse some of the more outrageous acts of this administration with regard to torture, unlawful surveillance, the misuse of the FISA court, the misuse of the state secrets privilege. All those things can be done. One thing that they may have to consider, which will be interesting since it could be the Democrats controlling Congress and the White House, but they could consider bringing back the special counsel law that they got rid of after the Clinton administration. What we've seen with Attorney General Mukasey and his predecessors is that the system just hasn't worked. That you don't have when the Attorney General does not have the principle and independence to allow investigations, to submit evidence to grand juries, the system literally shuts down. And we may have to re-examine whether we need a special counsel that can be called upon on such occasions.
The constitutional law professor, Jonathan Turley, as always, great thanks for your time tonight, sir.
Thank you, Keith.